talk to me to lay out strategy. I've had professors from the law college talk to me about various things because they have sense enough to recognize where knowledge is found. Now, when it comes to dealing treacherously, a governor can do it and get away with it. Makes me think of a little rhyme that I heard when I was a little kid going to church, and this fits the governor. He lived for himself, he worked for himself and none beside, just as though Christ had never lived, as though Christ had never died. That's these Christians around here. They talk it, but they don't practice it. And there's another thing that Jesus said, and it applies to what the governor is trying to get the legislature to do. First of all, under other governors, the Department of Corrections was a mess. We did a lot of work to straighten it out. Members of the legislature, some of those people have been term limited out. So Jesus had talked about the person who gets converted. The house is clean, swept, and straightened out. Then that old trick, the devil, the governor, sees it and said, and the devil comes in and tricks that person. He finds it swept, cleaned, and straightened out. He comes and occupies it again. And Jesus said that's when a person backslides and the state of that person is worse then than it was at the first. And then, you know what he compared it to? A dog returning to its vomit. The governor wants the legislature, the state, to return to the vomit that existed in the Department of Corrections before we did our work. I'm not going to let it be done in vain. I've given you one example of what I'll do to hold on to that budget, to keep us on it, and I think those of y'all who hang around will learn something. But gather this, brothers, sisters, friends, enemies, neutrals. The Supreme Court listened to what the legislature said about various programs. The Supreme Court believed what the legislature promised when it was making these presentations. The Supreme Court acted. And as the Chief Justice said, now the court is being left holding the bag. And the governor can sit back, or he's in Washington now while we're laboring here. The headline said he's among the celebrities watching a clown. The reason Barnum and Bailey Circus went out of business was not because animals lovers such as I were against what they did to elephants. The best circus in town was sitting in the White House, and Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey had no chance. The head clown was sitting there. But at any rate, I'm not going to allow this legislature to put the court in a position of saying, the laughs on you, the joke's on you. We pulled the rug from under you. And in the same way I went after rogue judges and will continue to do so, I will go after rogue legislators who shame this body and force us to adopt a rule change with reference to how we're going to handle state property. We should be trustworthy. But one of our members showed there is no trust that can be reposed. And since the public has seen that, and now paints us all with the same brush because the rogue is still among us, it was necessary to adopt that rule mainly for public relations. But the rogue is going to pay a price as long as he stays here. You all can sit on your hands and be quiet. I just cannot do everything at the same time, but I will not reinvent the wheel. The rhymes that I wrote during the interim, I'm going to read on this floor. But I mainly wanted today to point out my concern for the judiciary and what I intend to do to protect, to the extent I can, the money that they should be getting and that the governor wants heartlessly to take from them. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Chambers. Senator Shoemaker, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the body. There's been a lot of talk about the fiscal office this morning, and to a certain extent, we're asking them to be sorcerers, to look into the future and try to guesstimate what something is going to cost and what type of impact it's going to have on our spending. And that can be a spending measure, and we have the issue of every bill having a fiscal note to help with that guesstimate. But that fiscal note only goes out a couple of years, and then we can't see the future beyond that. Likewise, on a revenue side, what some tax program, some tax per credit deduction is going to cost. Underlying those fiscal notes are assumptions. One of the big assumptions is that revenues are going to grow kind of along the same way, up and down a little, but basically along the same way as they have for the last 20 or so years. That things have not changed with the Great Repression, nor have they changed with the baby boomer demands or the social changes coming through the system. Those are big assumptions. And every day that we're in session, past a point about mid-session, you will start getting a scorecard of what your actions are doing with respect to the amount of money we have. And that's a very interesting document to watch and a very constraining document. Now, in our processes, in the world of simplicity, before the age of financial creativity, you had a budget. You looked at things on a year-by-year basis. You adjusted it, and you had some control of expenses so that you wouldn't see unexpected flukes happen. But then we got clever, and we started spending money in another way besides just appropriating it. If you wanted to have this thing promoted, you'd appropriate a grant or a program or something and budget the money for it and work it out on the appropriation side and in the budget. But we got clever. We started spending money using a thing called tax credits. And when you do that, there's no appropriation of those. Once you set them in motion, they're in motion unless they self-terminate or unless there's some limit put in, a ceiling of some kind, and you lose track of them. And thus they sneak up on you. And they get bigger and bigger, and you never knew that they were going to happen that way. You have no control of them short of bringing them back in and trying to repeal or put sunsets or whatever on. And they are a way that the legislature and the Revenue Committee spend money outside the budget process. And we lose control of it. And we lose an idea of that, gee, a program we thought was going to cost $20 million a year in tax freebies has suddenly grown up to be $60 million a year in tax freebies. And we had no idea it was going to impact us, and it's continuing to grow. And if it did, we couldn't change it without actually adopting a bill with regard to that. And then if those tax credits are transferable or refundable or all kinds of wrinkles and breeds of them, life can even get more complicated.
1 minute.
So as you all become exposed to the game of state finance, there's the appropriation side. There's the revenue side of giving away tax things, of telling an employer, if you meet these criteria, you can keep your employees withholding. Don't bother sending it in. Those kind of things which we lose control of and are in some measure responsible for the pickle you're going to find yourself in over the next few years as you serve out your terms.